you know how to fire a phaser. Hello, welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Magnificent Ferengi, which is episode 10 of season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls, and the episode to win my latest Deep Space Nine user poll is the Magnificent Ferengi. So the Magnificent Ferengi is the episode in which Quark's mother Ishka is held captive by the Dominion, and Quark puts together a team of incompetent Ferengi to try to rescue her. Instead, they end up doing a negotiation where they exchange a Vorta prisoner for Ishka, but of course things go wrong. But Quark and his team manage to improvise and rescue Ishka safely, while at the same time capturing another Vorta. So, oh god, where do I begin with this episode? I hate Ferengi episodes. I honestly think that Ferengi episodes in general are the worst aspect of Deep Space Nine. They mostly try to be comedic, and they're mostly not funny. They're mostly boring. Like, there's some episodes I think are okay that don't really bother me that much, like the Nagus, or what was that one? The Rules of Acquisition. And then there's other ones that I think are god awful and great on my nerves to no end, like Ferengi Love Songs, or the Emperor's New Cloak, or the worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, Prophet and Lace. But so every time I would see a commercial or a preview for the next week's episode, it would be a Ferengi episode. I'm like, oh, god damn it. And sometimes I wouldn't even bother. To be honest, sometimes I would just skip it. And, you know, some of them I would go back and watch. Like the Ferengi Love Songs, like I skipped that one. So when I first saw this episode, I actually didn't catch the references to that episode because I didn't watch it. However, all that being said, I love this episode. This episode is, to me, the one golden exception in the Ferengi episode suck rule. This is actually the only Ferengi episode done correct. And I mean Ferengi episode, I mean the episode that's centered on all like Ferengis. I'm not talking about episodes like House of Quark or Business as Usual, which I love Business as Usual. Those are more of Quark episodes. I consider those more Quark episodes than I do Ferengi episodes. I think there's a difference. This is clearly a Ferengi episode. And it's good. Now the thing is, when I first saw the preview for this episode, I didn't think I didn't have that same reaction I did whenever I see all the Ferengi episodes. I wasn't like, oh god. I was like, wait a second. So Quark has to rescue his mother from the Dominion? What? And it piqued my interest. Now, part of me was thinking, well, come on. Can't you guys use the Dominion better than to do a stupid Ferengi episode? But the other part of me was thinking, well, if they got to do a Ferengi episode, at least they'd bring in the Dominion. That's going to make it more interesting. Now, I will say that when I first saw this episode, and I have actually a clear recollection of when I first saw this episode, when it first came out, but it wasn't when the day it first aired, because this one I missed. Not purposely, it's just when Season 6 was airing, and I talked about this a lot in my Season 6. Even though I love Season 6 now, at the time it was airing, I was like I was either 17 or 18, but I was 18, I think, but I was in my party phase. I was out partying and hanging out with friends. I had a life. Oh, remember the days when I actually had one of those. Anyway, so my life interfered with my watching Deep Space Nine. So even though I loved Season 6, there's a lot of episodes in it I missed because of that, and this was one of them. But I have a clear recollection of when I did see this, because it was the summer after season 6 had finished airing, but this is back in the day. I don't know if networks still do this, but when syndicated shows, Deep Space Nine would come on every week, all year round. Like once a week, they would play Deep Space Nine. If the season was finished and there were no new episodes, they would just do a reruns. That like they would run through the entire season like twice. And there were like intermittent, people. I wonder if this is just a 90s thing or they still do this with network television because I don't even watch network television anymore. So this might be, back in my day. But anyone like sort of older will know what I'm talking about. Because nowadays, I remember even Lost, that was the 2000s, they would just show each episode once and that's it. And once all of the episodes was aired once, they would just put another show in that time slot. Whereas, back in the day, Deep Space Nine was in that time slot every single week, year round. But, of course, there's only 26 episodes. So when when they finished, they would just intermix reruns from the season. So that's when I saw this episode, when it was on rerun. So it was the new slot, but it was over the summer, which of course is the summer break, so there are no new episodes. And so they were replaying this episode, and I was in a hotel in Arizona. It was a trip. The first trip it was the first time I ever left the East Coast of the United States. I went to Arizona with my parents, who went to the Grand Canyon and Sedona and all that. And then my siblings at the time, they lived in Oregon, and they were driving down, and I was supposed to meet up with them, and my parents would fly back to the East Coast, and my siblings were supposed to pick me up, and then I would hang out with them, and they were supposed to come while my parents were still there, but they had car troubles, they broke down, and so they were late in getting there. So I was stuck in Flagstaff by myself because my parents had to leave. They had to catch their flights back to the East Coast. So I was stuck in the hotel for, I want to say like 4 days or something. So I was, bored with nothing to do. And I remember while I was in that hotel, Deep Space Nine was coming on. I was flipping through the channels and saw the new episode, because it has said it was in a rerun over the summer, of Deep Space Nine was coming on. It happened to be this episode, and so that's the first time I watched it. And I remember telling my sister about this, and she was just like, she wasn't interested. I was like, it was actually a pretty good episode. But to be honest, like, I didn't start loving this episode until years later, when I was married and I was watching this with my spouse at the time, who found this episode hilarious, and I actually found it more hilarious as well. And I think there's something to be said about that communal experience, because you're sitting down, you're watching a comedy episode, and you have someone to sort of laugh at. It helps with comedy episodes. And so ever since then, I looked on this as the best comedy episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, and I completely stand by that. And especially rewatching it now, I think it's the most effective, most well-written, and quite frankly, funniest episode that the Star Trek franchise has ever put out. In fact, I think I did a video where I named the top 10 funniest episodes of Star Trek, and this is my number 1. And I absolutely stand by that. Now, it's funny because it's funny, get it funny, but humor is a very subjective thing. So it's hard to really critique. I mean, you can say the jokes are like well written, well performed, and there's a certain cadence or rhythm to it that works, because you can certainly write comedy incorrectly, where the jokes aren't delivered very well. Maybe it's bad acting, or it's kind of out of place and they're not set up for properly. But even that being said, like, just because they are constructed well doesn't mean you're going to find it funny. Like, there's a lot of Will Ferrell movies, for example, which I'm sure are written, delivered very well. I just don't think it's funny. I hate Will Ferrell. I just personally don't find it funny. So humor is a very subjective thing. So, I mean, you could say that for all entertainment, all television, movies, of course. But I think, to me, humor is even more subjective when it's comedic, because people just find things funny. I think the art of the craft and how well it's constructed matter a lot more for other genres like action, drama, suspense, all horror, all that sort of thing. Whereas comedy, I think it all boils down to, you can deliver it well, you can set it up and see if it works, but it all boils down to an individual's sense of humor, which vary greatly. So this makes it really hard for me to sort of place this episode, because it fits my sense of humor perfectly. Now, there's other people who maybe it doesn't. Maybe they just don't find this funny at all. Like, for example, when I did my top 10 episodes of funniest episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, I didn't have any original series episodes in there, and I got a lot of comments saying, what the hell? Why? How can you call this the top 10 funniest episodes of Star Trek if you don't have any original series episodes? What about the Trouble with Tribbles? What about a piece of the action? And here's the thing. I don't like the type of humor that they had in the 60s. It's just, again, this is my own personal sense of humor. It's too cheesy. I don't find it funny. In fact, for me, the funniest episodes of the original series are the ones that are unintentionally funny, that weren't trying to do humor, but they're just so stupid and ridiculous, like the Savage Curtain or Spock's brain or stuff like that. The episodes where the comedic episodes where they're actually trying to be funny, especially how they had those little things at the end of each episode when Kirk and Spock and McCoy were on the bridge going ho ho and doing zingers. Like, I hated those. So although, to be fair, I did like the Trouble with Tribbles, but I would describe that more as a fun episode rather than a funny episode. And I think the same is true of Trial and Tribulations. And I think there is a difference between fun and funny, because fun is like, oh, it's lighthearted, you enjoy it. By the way, bada bing, bada bang, not fun. Just wanted to point that out again. Anyway, but there's a difference between Move Along Home. Now that's fun. But anyway, there's a difference between fun and funny, because fun is like, oh, it's lighthearted, you enjoy it. Funny is you're laughing out loud. You're like, oh, ha, ha, ha. It induces laughter. You think it's hilarious. And I gotta tell you, as I said, I laughed my ass off at this episode. So this is, I think, the only effective comedy episode of the Star Trek franchise. It's the only one. Well, okay, there's one other that is, the Voyager episode with the Doctor, Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy. Okay, that's the other effective comedy episode. So there's two effective comedy episodes that are actually funny. At least for me, as I said, sense of humor, very subjective thing. But at least for me, it's the only two episodes where I was laughing throughout the whole episode. The only two of the entire Star Trek franchise. Although, if you include movies, there's Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Okay, but that's a movie, not an episode. But if you want, that's in the Star Trek franchise, though. So to be fair, all right, Voyage Home as well. So those three. But out of those three, this is the funniest, in my opinion. I think this is the one which just... No, it's really well performed. It's really well written, but it seems kind of relentless, like joke after joke after joke after joke. And it's... I mean, if I had to get into the specifics, it's hard, because whenever I review... I find it harder to review comedy episodes, because as I said, sense of humor is such a subjective thing. And it was hard for me when I was reviewing BoJack Horseman as well, because I find myself just repeating the jokes. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, just because... Alright, so... Alright, so this episode to me was... Some people might say it's the antithesis, like the complete opposite of Prophet and Lace, but I actually disagree with that. Now, Prophet and Lace was, as I mentioned before... It's funny because there were only 2 Ferengi episodes that come out in season 6. One is this episode, which I think is the best Ferengi episode, and I actually put it in my top 20 best Deep Space Nine episodes of all time. Although, in retrospect, I think that's a bit, maybe I'd put it down a bit more, maybe top 30, top 40, maybe top 20 is getting a bit too carried away. I do think this is one of the better episodes of the entire show. That was one episode that came out in season 6, one Ferengi episode. The other Ferengi episode is Prophet and Lace, which, as I mentioned, I think is the clear worst episode of DS9, and it's the clear worst episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. It wasn't the least bit funny. It was the opposite of funny. It was annoying. And like, none of the jokes landed. So in some sense, I would think that was the complete opposite of this episode, because in this episode, all the jokes landed and it was absolutely funny throughout. And it's funny because it probably had the same writers and same people involved, so it's really strange how they could get it so right and then like a few months later get it so wrong. But all that being said, I don't think that episode's the opposite of this episode. I think the Emperor's New Cloak is the exact opposite of this episode. And I'll tell you why. Because a huge thing of what makes this episode work and what sells this episode for me so much is the interactions, the dialogue between Quark and Rom. And I think this is by far easily Rom's best episode, at least as far as comedic. Maybe if you get into more drama things, there's some season 7 episodes or whatnot, but the most, like, Rom's usually a comedic character, let's be fair, and he's usually like lighthearted and saying, yeah, hi, I'm Rom, that's Quark, that's Gayla, and Quark's like, Rom, he doesn't care. Anyway, as I told you, I'll just be repeating jokes. But anyway, like, Rom is a silly character, and this is the best use of him when he's being used in that silly comedic way, by far, easily. And it also the sort of the interplay between Max Groden, I can't pronounce his last name, but the actor who plays Rom, and Armin Shimerman, the actor who plays Quark, the interaction between them is absolutely golden. And you can tell by this stage that the two actors knew each other and worked with each other so much. In fact, there was this thing that was mentioned in the documentary about how every time there was a Ferengi episode, Armin Shimerman would invite all the Ferengi actors over to his house for a rehearsal, and they would like hang out and rehearse and everything. And they sort of had this camaraderie. And I think this episode in particular, that camaraderie, that sort of chemistry between these two actors really pays off the most. And that's why I think Emperor's New Cloak is the exact opposite of this episode, because the Quark and Rom dynamic just failed. It fell flat. Like, every time Rom, and it was Rom at his least funniest and most annoying. Like, every time he said a joke, I was just like, oh, shut up. Jesus, I'm talking about Emperor's New Cloak. When you were like, oh, is that why they call it alternate? It's just, I found it annoying. And again, this is where the objective sense of humor comes in, because I've heard other YouTubers say that they actually did like that. They actually did find it funny. I did not. I found it highly irritating, and I honestly don't think the chemistry between Quark and Rom worked in that episode. I think so. That's why I would call that the opposite, because that was a Quark and Rom pairing where they were just being annoying as fuck and the chemistry didn't work. Where this Magnificent Ferengi was the episode where the pairing was golden, and their the actors' camaraderie and their chemistry like was on display and worked the best. And I think that was the heart of the episode, even though that wasn't like the center of the jokes. But here's the thing, like, I think from start to finish, like, every joke, they sprinkle in jokes throughout the entire episode, which is what I think the best. They don't wait for like the one funny scene or whatever before they start the jokes. Like Star Trek 4 actually does that, because it's actually quite serious with the probe and whatnot for the first half hour or 40 minutes, and they're all serious going back in time. It's like a serious drama, but then once they're there, suddenly it's a comedy. Now, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think the more effective comedies is when it's like the jokes, it begins laying on the hilarity and the effect of funny jokes. And I think that does that. Like, for example, at the start of the episode, you had Quark and Rom going through the Turbolist when Quark was trying to explain a very serious, like, high stakes situation. Look, our mother's been abducted by the Dominion, and we've been tasked by the Grand Nagus to go on a rescue mission for her. It's a very serious. But the way their interaction in that scene is hilarious. And the way when Quark is saying, he talks about like a 5-bar Latin finder fee, and then Quark's like, oh, Rom, I have something I have to tell you. And Rom's like, what, the 5 bars of Latin is a very generous finder fee? I already knew that. And he's like, no, I have to tell you that Moogie and the Grand Nagus are having an affair. And Rom's like, no. And then Quark keeps explaining everything about how Moogie was the power behind the Grand Nagus. He goes, no, like, that's funny. And then as they're crawling through the turbo shafts, they go into Sisko's office, and because they were like caught in their conversation, Sisko's like, can I help you, gentlemen? Like, I've heard before someone mentioned that was just a way to include Avery Brooks in this episode, and since that is his only appearance, that's probably true. But it doesn't seem like, oh, they just had to have the scene just to throw Sisko in, because it worked. Like, maybe that was why they had that scene, but they didn't just, all right, let's just throw Sisko in there. No, they made it work because that's actually a really relatable thing, especially when you're having a conversation and you're really caught up in it and really involved, that you kind of maybe forget what you're doing and how they just accidentally pop up in Sisko's office. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. Now, the episode is called The Magnificent Ferengi, which is a play off the Magnificent Seven, but the writers and everyone involved themselves say that it doesn't really have to do with, like, it's not a remake, or it doesn't even follow the same format of the Magnificent Seven. Like, for example, the episode Profit and Loss, not to be confused with Profit and Lace, but the season 2 episode Profit and Loss was said to be pretty much follow the exact same format as Casablanca, which I never realized. That wasn't a very good episode either. But that's not the case here. They just thought it was a cute title. It doesn't actually resemble the Magnificent Seven, except for the only thing is the way how they are, of course, 7 of them. Or is there 6? No, there's 6, sorry. That's right. My mistake. There's 6 Ferengi, so it's actually, that doesn't even resemble it in that regard. But it does resemble it in the regard where every time someone else joins your team, they, like, have the fingers, like, there's 2 of us, and now there's 3, and we're 4, and all that. But other than that, it doesn't resemble Magnificent Ferengi. But I thought that was a pretty cool, through story. And then, as I said, when they included Nog, like, they used him, and, like, this is the funniest Nog has ever been, too, as well. As I said, like, my sort of opening there when I quoted Rom saying, but you know how to fire a phaser. Like, I thought that was absolutely hilarious, but I think one of the funniest scenes is when they're in the bar and Nog's, like, laying out the schematic, and of course they enticed Nog to join the group by being like, oh, you can be strategic, like appealing to his ego and wanting to be, and so Nog is acting all like militaristic, and he has all these pads like, you examine the schematic and blah blah blah, and Lex looking at it, it's like, so how can we be sure these schematics are correct? And Nog just says, how can you be sure these schematics are correct, sir? And Lex like, oh, no reason to stand on formation and on formality. Just call me Lex. It's like, no, I think you should refer to me as sir. And they all get pissed off. And one of the funniest lines, Quark was like, Nog, we're all a team here. And then Rom corrects him, we're all a team, sir. It's just not. I mean, Rom just worked so well in this episode. But not being around the bush, let's get to what I think is the absolute funniest scene in the entire Star Trek franchise, which Correct. I was on, like, I wouldn't say the first time, but maybe the second time that I mentioned that I watched this episode, I was literally on the floor laughing, and I missed a lot of the dialogue to the end because both me and my spouse were like laughing hysterically. And that's the scene in the holodeck where they're training. Of course, we don't know it's the holo suite at first, but when they go to attack the Janitor, and Quark's like, surrender, you're surrounded, and the Gemini just starts shooting them all, and Rom just slams like face first into the wall. And then Bron just throws his weapon up. Oh, he surrendered. And then Lek just kills Mookie. Oh, I'm sorry, I told you that reviewing comedy episodes just ends up in me repeating the jokes and laughing at it. But my God, that's comedy gold. Not only is that the funniest scene in all of Star Trek, that is one of the funniest scenes in any comedy ever. That was just so brilliantly executed, so brilliantly constructed. And I love how at the moment, like when that scene takes place, you don't know that it's the holosuite. I mean, if you think about it logically, because they mentioned this was like the 16th time they tried it, that doesn't really, I mean, Lek is going to shoot Mookie and Bron's going to throw up and surrender after 16 times. I mean, because you would buy that's how they would react in real life. But if they know it's a simulation, I don't think Bron's going to throw up his face there and surrender. Slam straight first into the wall. Oh my God, it's comedy gold. It's absolutely brilliant. Oh my gosh. So I think that is one of the most effective funny comedy scenes I've ever seen ever in anything, not just Star Trek. It's pure gold. It's easily the best in Star Trek. Easily, extremely easily. Nothing, not even in that other Voyager episode or the Voyage Home, comes close. Although, okay, the Voyager episode, that one where the Doctor's singing Tuvok, and that comes a little bit close, but just a little bit. But this is still easily the best. And it is one of the best in the entire Star Trek franchise. I mean, not for Star Trek, sorry. One of the best in any TV movie film ever. My personal opinion, of course. But I stand by that statement. But then, as I said, it doesn't crescendo there. Like, it doesn't die down. You're like, okay, so they had the funniest scene ever, so now the episode's just going to get a bit boring. But no, they keep up the laughs. They had that scene I already quoted with Rom introducing himself to Kevon, who just doesn't give a fuck. and like when Quark says Rom, he doesn't care. He's like, truer words were never spoken. like that. And how... And the whole thing about Quark cheating them, saying there's 20 bars when really there's 50. And then Rom just, when they're celebrating, when it looks like they're going to see Rom, just blurts out, oh, 50 bars. And then everyone starts freaking out, 50? Like, this is why it's the best use of the Ferengi, because that is so true to their characters. But usually when they do that sort of thing, it's not as effective and not funny. Usually it's like, oh yeah, Ferengi is slimy, want money, but they actually use it extremely well in this episode because it's so in Quark's character to lie to them and try to hoard the money, and so in Rom's character to just idiotically blurt it out without thinking, and it's so in all the other Ferengi's character to, of course, get really pissed off. And then you have Gala, who grabs the rifle and like tries to kill Quark, but instead kills Kevon. And I gotta admit, this time watching it around, I laughed my ass off at that scene in particular. Where it's like, you've died for the last time, grabs the phaser, shoots it, and all the Ferengi get out of the way and shoots Kevon. And they're all just looking over. And I love, again, great cinematography, great way it's constructed. How they show the shot is like from looking upwards from all the Ferengi looking down, like Kevon's dead body, and then they all just stare to look at Gala, and then Quark's like, "You idiot!" It's like really effective. And then we have our weekend at Bernie's moment, which I was laughing my ass off at. I don't know. I think some other people, like my spouse in particular, found that scene funnier than I did. Like they thought that was the best scene ever, not the other one. I think it's the other one, but this scene was still hilarious. How Kevon is like like dead body and they're trying to operate it with thing, and he just slams into the wall and starts. That was pretty damn funny too. So let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about Iggy Pop playing Vorta. I think that also makes this episode great. I've heard some people complain about his acting, and I gotta highly disagree with that. Iggy Pop has acted in other things, and apparently Ira Stephen Bear is a huge Iggy Pop fan, and he came on set when the filming this episode was fanboying out, and they tried to get Iggy Pop earlier. He was going to appear in the episode Past Tense. I can't remember what character I think he was meant to play. I think he was meant to play the security guard, and I don't think he would have fit very well. Actually, I would have thought he would play BC. I thought he might do a better job at that. But anyway, his schedule conflicts or whatever, and he couldn't make it. But they were finally able to get it on this one. It's funny because Iron Stephen Bear even said, like, afterwards in retrospect, that he regretted casting Iggy Pop as a Vorta, because Vortas are usually very immobile and stiff, and Iggy Pop is very, very physical and fluent. So he regrets not casting Iggy Pop in a more sort of energetic or kinetic role, which I can definitely see that, and it was a bit strange. But I think even within his limit, like the way he used his face and was like, "I no time or no patience" and all that, like, and I think his comedic timing worked as well, especially since he was the straight man in this episode. I think he filled that role pretty well. So I gotta disagree. I think he did a great job, and it was interesting seeing him there. Other things of note in this episode, and again, I love the fucking continuity, and season 6 of Deep Space Nine is one of the things that make it so great, is that when Quark needs something to trade for the Dominion, he goes to Kira and asks for a favor, or at least, I don't know if he goes to Kira directly, that's not made clear, but Kira is the one who convinces Sisko to give him the Vorta, because Quark saved her life, and when the Dominion take over his story arc, he's the one who broke in with Zial's help, but really he was the one who did it. Like, Zial couldn't have done it without him, and broke her out of jail and saved her from the Jem'Hadar, and that was a significant thing, and I love the callback to that, and I love. It's an interesting dynamic, because usually Kira, like, hates Quark, like, the whole thing. Like, if you don't have all these advertisements routes from the station, I will go to Quark's, and believe me, I will have fun. Like, these two characters have been shown to have a very antagonistic relationship, and it's really interesting and well earned that that's changed, because Quark had literally saved her life. And that she, instead of trying to play it off and ignore it, she shows her gratitude. And when Quark thanks Sisko for it, he's like, "Oh, don't thank me, thank Major Kira." And she's like, "It's the least I can do after what you did for saving me." And it's great continuity. Now, other thing to talk about this episode is how Grand Nagus Zeke is not in this episode, which is a shame, because I do love Wallace Shawn as a great actor. I think he probably would have added to the comedic timing. But here's the thing. Originally, it was supposed to be Zeke who was captured by the Dominion and not Ishka, which at first I thought, oh yeah, that would have been better. That would have made more sense. But the more I thought about it, the more I think, actually, no. I think it actually, the episode works much better if having it be Ishka. Now, the obvious sort of way that it doesn't work is, why would the Dominion have Ishka as just a average Ferengi citizen? If they're going to capture someone, why don't they capture, like, the leader of the Ferengi Alliance? But I think they explained that pretty well in this episode, because they didn't specifically capture Ishka, that they captured a Federation transport that she happened to be on because she was going to Vulcan for some surgery or something, which to me that makes perfect sense. So she was just one of many prisoners. Like, they didn't specifically go after her; they just happened to have her. So I like that. I think that works. But here's why I don't think Zeke would work as well, because Zeke is the leader of the Ferengi Alliance. He is definitely a way more important character. It would make no sense for the Ferengi Alliance to entrust a bartender and his mechanic brother with them with rescuing the leader of the entire Ferengi fucking alliance. An alliance that spans worlds, and of course is, probably has a lot of interest and profit and commodities involved with commerce, and is a huge commercial entity within the Alpha Quadrant, or Alpha and Beta Quadrants, however you want to say it, that whole area. And so it makes zero sense for them to entrust the leader of this vast alliance, his safety and rescue, with a bartender. That's stupid. So, I mean, they would have like a military, or what do they call those guys, daemons or whatever, who would jump at a chance to kiss up to the boss, because that's been established, one of the rules of acquisition. It never hurts to suck up to the boss. That they would jump at a chance for that 50 bar reward, and that there would be more sort of military people who are more well trained. And so when it's Ishka, that makes more sense because it's Quark's mother, so that makes sense why he would be tasked with it, and why Zeke would care to drive the reward, because they're lovers, and why it would just be these 6 civilians rather than the military, because the military wouldn't care that much. Now, granted, the 50 bar reward would probably entice sort of more militaristic Ferengi to go after her, but that is sort of a suspension of disbelief thing, because they're not main characters and Quark is. So there is still flaw, but I think if it was Zeke, it would be way more flawed, and it would make no sense why the fuck Quark is tasked with rescuing them. So that leads me to my complaint about this episode. As much as I love it, and to be fair, like, I tend to not care too much about this complaint because it's such a great, funny episode. And usually with comedies, like, I have a lot more leeway for comedies. I talked about this in my review of The Orville, how season 1 was a comedy parody, so I was able to hand wave all the mistakes away. But when season 2 tried to be more dramatic, I no longer hand wave those mistakes. Those mistakes come at me full force now and be like, no, this sucks now if they're trying to be serious. And that's true. I think, and that works with genres. So in this episode, since it's a straight out comedy, and the comedy is so damn good, I'm a lot more sort of willing to just hand wave these mistakes away as not mattering. But they still exist, so let me bring it up. That is that kind of what I touched on before, that this episode treats it as if there's no Ferengi military. Now, there's a problem. I've heard some people refer to it as the species of the races of hats, where every sort of race in Star Trek has one characteristic, like Klingons are warriors, Vulcans are logical, and they're scientists, and Ferengi are just all about profit and earning money. And so they're all businessmen. But that's not how actual societies would function. You need to have various different people in the group throughout history, human history, real life history. No society functions that way. You have to have there could be a focus, like definitely some more militaristic or dictatorships were definitely more military focused, but even them, like even they had like scientists or divisions or commerce. Like you need to have all of that, even if it's less commonplace. And there have been some Star Trek episodes that focus on this, like that Suspicions episode of Next Generation, which that stands by, is not very good. But they showed a Klingon scientist and they showed a Ferengi scientist. And he even mentioned how he was kind of sort of not treated very well by the other Ferengi because he chose to delve in the sciences. And you had there's other, like the Enterprise episode that had a Klingon lawyer where he's not really about being a warrior. He was more about being a lawyer. Tongue twisting. And how he was kind of outcast for that. But so they explore how every species has to, even though if it's not commonplace and it's less like encouraged in the culture, they still exist. Like you have a Cardassian scientists, you have lawyers, you have all these different types of occupations. They all can't be businessmen. And now, granted, the Ferengi culture celebrates the businessmen first and most of all, just like the Klingon culture celebrates the warriors most of all. But you still need to have a Ferengi military. And in fact, in Next Generation, we see a lot of Ferengi military. Like they could be a threat to Starfleet. Like we've seen that a Ferengi ship was the ship that pretty not destroyed, but pretty much almost destroyed the Stargazer and had it scrapped. So they were an adversary. And even you might say, "Oh, Mark, that's just first season when they were going to make the Ferengi the villains, and they changed their mind and made them goofballs instead." But even later seasons of Next Generation, you had I'm not going to reference Rascals. I hate that fucking episode. But maybe I'll reference the Force of Nature when there's a Ferengi ship that attacks the Enterprise. Like, they still have military ships. And even if they are profit-based, and even if that is the main motivation of their culture, they still have a military class. They're still capable, and I'm sure they would have like a Black Ops or, a intelligence division, even though it may look very different than, say, like Cardassia or Romula or even the Starfleet's intelligence division. Maybe it would be extremely subpar. It would still exist. Like, they would still have one. They would still have a Ferengi Black Ops team, even if it would be like a joke compared to like Starfleet's Black Ops team. They would still have one. It would still exist. So, and that's kind of, I think like Deep Space Nine throughout has kind of done this. This is something I criticized Deep Space Nine for. Throughout its entire run, that's kind of implied that the Ferengi have no sort of military might, which contradicts how they were portrayed in the Next Generation. But I actually think this episode is the worst example of that, because they particularly note like lines with when Quark tells Rom they want to rescue their mother. Rom's like, okay, let's get some mercenaries together. We'll go Nausicaans, Klingons, Breen, and Quark's response is, no, we don't need Nausicaans, Klingons, or Breen. Let's just do it all Ferengi. And Rom's like, we're all gonna die. I love Rom's performance here. Now, again, you could say that the Nausicaans, Klingons, and Breen are more warrior-based than the Ferengi. But I think the way they play it off in this episode does imply that the Ferengi are completely useless. Now, granted, the ones that they do get are kind of useless, and that's my issue, is that why this surely, and especially if this is a high-stakes VIP who Zek's going to give a 50-bar reward for, why don't they get like a Black Ops Ferengi team? Even if they're not as good as Starfleet or Klingons, they would still be better than Quark and fucking Brunt. I mean, come on. And Rom. Now, all that being said, it does we do see an odd Ferengi in this episode, so I gotta give it some leeway for that, because we meet Lek, who is actually a hitman. He's an assassin who actually doesn't even care much about profits. Like when Quark says, like, there's latinum involved, he's like, I don't care about latinum. And Rom's like, oh, you're right, brother, he is different, Ferengi. Like, so I do have to give him some credit for that. And Lek was kind of this psychopath hitman type. But even so, like, they shouldn't have to turn to a hitman to rescue a VIP figure. This should be an organization within the military who specializes in doing this sort of thing, even if they're not that good. They should still exist. So that has always bothered me about this episode. But, as I said, it's a comedy, so who cares? Like if they had this Black Ops team, then they couldn't have this funny episode with Rom slamming into the wall and throwing his face like, I surrender. The comedy works so well that I'm willing to give that a pass. Anyway, my rating for the Magnificent Ferengi out of 10. I'm going to give this episode a 10. The best. I was very close to giving it a 9. Because it is so keyed on comedy. And as I said, if you look at it logically, it doesn't really make much sense. But comedies aren't meant to be looked at logically. And it's such an effective comedy. And I think I actually talked myself into a 10 as I was doing this review. Like, I began this review thinking I'd give it a 9. But the more I talked about how much the comedy works, how brilliantly it's constructed, just how the comedy is sprinkled through without, it deserves a 10. And it deserves a 10 for different reasons than pretty much any other episode of Star Trek I would give a 10 to. It's because it's funny. It's because it's a great comedy and is easily the best comedy in the entire Star Trek franchise and one of the best comedies in any television, movie, anything. My opinion, of course. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Magnificent Ferengi. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek reviews, as well as reviewing shows like The Expanse, Breaking Bad, The Outer Limits, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.